The Real Dexter, the true story of the serial killer who inspired the show. Dexter Morgan, a character who made us question, can a serial killer be a hero? A hunter of monsters who is himself a monster? A maniac hiding behind the mask of an ordinary person? But what if we told you that Dexter is not just fiction? That behind this show lies a real story? The story of a killer who operated almost exactly the same way, but without a code. Chapter 1. Who was he? His name was Manuel Da Costa. An ordinary man at first glance, but something sinister lurked beneath his flawless exterior. He led a double life, one as an unremarkable employee, the other as a cold-blooded executioner. His victims vanished, their bodies found late or never found at all. He didn't kill randomly. His targets were those he saw as the embodiment of evil. He was born in a small town in northern Portugal to a strict Catholic family. His father was a police officer, his mother a schoolteacher. From a young age, he showed an analytical mind and keen observational skills, but remained withdrawn. At the age of 10, he witnessed a horrific crime. His neighbor kidnapped and murdered a girl he used to play with. The police arrested the criminal, but due to insufficient evidence, he was released. This was the first blow to the boy's faith in justice. As a teenager, Manuel became fascinated with medicine, biology, and chemistry. He spent hours studying anatomical atlases and experimenting with different substances. At university, he chose forensic science to understand how the justice system worked. He excelled academically but was antisocial, avoiding parties and immersing himself in books and crime reports. In secret, he collected newspaper clippings about serial killers and criminals who escaped punishment. It wasn't just a hobby. He was preparing for something bigger. He committed his first murder in 1996. His victim was a man who had avoided punishment for raping a minor. Da Costa had been watching him for a long time. He knew his daily routine, his contacts, his nighttime activities. He planned everything meticulously. He studied the local police patrol schedules, knew where surveillance cameras were positioned, which streets remained dark at night. On one such night, he tracked his victim into an alley and delivered a precise knife strike to the heart. No one heard a thing. No one saw. It looked like a random mugging. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. After his first taste of blood, he didn't stop. On the contrary, killing gave him a sense of control, a sense of justice he didn't see in the legal system. He began researching more cases of injustice, searching for people he believed deserved punishment. His list included those he deemed unworthy of life: corrupt officials, pimps, rapists, murderers who were released due to lack of evidence. He acted methodically. Sometimes he staged accidents, car crashes, overdoses, accidental drownings. But more often, he worked differently. He lured his victims to isolated places, immobilized them, and interrogated them. He wanted them to recognize their guilt before death. He recorded their confessions on tape, as if gathering evidence for an invisible court. Some victims cried, begged for mercy, while others laughed in his face, but none were spared. The police never connected these deaths to a single case. He was careful, too careful, but he couldn't stop. At some point, he wasn't just seeking justice. Killing became his way of life. He saw himself as the arbiter of fate, but he lost the ability to distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. When he mistakenly killed someone who had been falsely accused, it triggered his first internal crisis. But even then, he didn't stop. His hands were already too deep in blood. Chapter 2. Cleansing the City of Evil. A maniac who killed criminals. It sounds like the plot of a TV series, but this was real. Da Costa chose victims among rapists, drug dealers, and criminals whom the system failed to punish. But was he a hero, or just another psychopath justifying his murders? For the first year, his crimes went unnoticed by law enforcement. Bodies disappeared. There were no witnesses, and everything pointed to accidents. But when 7 people connected to the criminal underworld vanished in a matter of months, the police realized this was no coincidence. A killer was on the streets, targeting those considered untouchable. Da Costa had a system. He meticulously studied his victims, tracked their movements, recorded conversations. He gathered evidence of their crimes. But unlike the police, he didn't wait for warrants or court decisions. Once his dossier was complete, he acted. One of his most high-profile victims was Luis El Tiburón Mendez, a crime boss who controlled an underground human trafficking ring in Lisbon. He made millions exploiting women, yet the police never found enough evidence to convict him. Da Costa decided to correct this mistake. For 3 months, he followed Mendez, recording his meetings and conversations. Then he kidnapped him from his own car, staging an armed robbery. A week later, Mendez's body was found in the river. The police found no evidence. This case caused an uproar. The criminal underworld whispered of a ghost, a maniac who left no traces. Some called him a vigilante, others the new Dexter, while others simply saw him as a psychopath who had decided to play God. But he didn't stop there. Over the next 2 years, he eliminated another 15 people, all those he believed had escaped justice. His victims weren't just criminals. They were symbols of a rotten system where money and power allowed people to evade responsibility. While the police did nothing, he acted. A serial killer on a mission? Or a monster in disguise? Media outlets exploded with speculation. The Phantom of Lisbon, a man who struck from the shadows, delivering his own twisted form of justice. Was he the savior the city needed? Or was he no different from the monsters he hunted? The internet buzzed with conspiracy theories, some calling him a hero, others demanding his head. Meanwhile, criminal families panicked. Drug lords, sex traffickers, and underground kingpins suddenly feared for their lives. They weren't afraid of the police. They were afraid of him. What happens when a serial killer decides to become a vigilante? Da Costa didn't just kill. He sent a message. Some bodies were found with chilling inscriptions carved into their skin. No mercy for monsters. Others were posed as warnings, left in places where their former associates would find them. He was no longer just a killer, he was a legend. But legends attract attention, and attention meant danger. As his killings escalated, so did the pressure. Crime families put a bounty on his head. Find him, kill him, end this. The police, now under intense scrutiny, began connecting the dots. A task force was assembled, and for the first time, the hunter was being hunted. His safe houses became temporary, his movements erratic. But Da Costa refused to flee. He saw himself as a necessary force, a last resort in a world drowning in corruption. Hero or monster, you decide. Psychologists and criminologists debated his motives. Was he truly on a crusade for justice, or had he simply found a justification for his addiction to killing? Some theorized that his early childhood trauma had shaped his moral compass, twisted yet rigid. Others argued that he had long crossed the line into pure psychopathy. But one thing was clear: Da Costa was no longer in control of his own fate. The walls were closing in. And then he made his first mistake. Between chapters, the killer's secret diaries. One of the most unsettling discoveries in Da Costa's case was the existence of his personal diaries, a meticulous record of his murders, each entry filled with chilling justifications for his actions. Unlike Dexter Morgan, who collected blood slides as trophies, Da Costa documented everything, every name, every act, every thought behind his executions. These journals weren't just records, they were manifestos of self-proclaimed justice. He wrote in gruesome detail about his victims' crimes, about the moment he decided they were beyond redemption, and about the act of killing itself. "Some men don't deserve a second chance," he scribbled on one page. "I am the reckoning they never saw coming." When the police finally got their hands on these notebooks, they were horrified. The level of detail, the lack of remorse, It painted a picture of a man who truly believed he was above the law. It also became key evidence in court, dismantling any argument that he was simply a man driven to extremes. This was methodical. This was premeditated. Was he really justice incarnate? Or was he simply indulging a darkness he refused to acknowledge? Chapter 3. The Real Dexter's Tactics. Da Costa's methods were disturbingly precise. Like Dexter Morgan, he followed a strict ritual, carefully selecting his victims, ensuring they were truly guilty, and executing them with surgical precision. But unlike Dexter, there was no code, no Harry to guide him, only his own sense of justice. Dexter meticulously wrapped his victims in plastic, creating a sterile crime scene. Da Costa, on the other hand, left nothing behind. He erased all traces. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. He studied forensic science like a professional, staying ahead of investigators at every turn. He used burner phones, fake IDs, and even encrypted messages. He wasn't just a killer, he was a ghost. His ability to remain invisible was almost supernatural. He hacked security systems, avoided CCTV cameras, and constantly changed his appearance. Dexter had his police access, but Da Costa had something even more dangerous: absolute anonymity. But as the killings continued, his precision began to slip. Like Dexter in later seasons, the thrill of the hunt clouded his judgment. The need to kill became stronger than the need to stay undetected. Some victims were injected with paralytics, their final moments spent in helpless terror. Others were taken by surprise, vanishing without a trace. Their bodies were found weighted down in rivers, burned to ash, or never found at all. To the police, it seemed as though the earth had swallowed them whole. In Dexter, the main character struggled with the duality of his existence, masking his true self behind a friendly, socially acceptable face. Da Costa was no different. He maintained a mild-mannered persona, appearing harmless to those around him. But inside, he was calculating, always analyzing, always planning. Like Dexter, he lived two lives, but unlike Dexter, he had no family to tether him to humanity. He was fascinated with control, not just over life and death, but over the entire game of cat and mouse with the police. He often planted false leads, creating fake alibis, setting up staged crime scenes that misled detectives. Dexter used his forensic knowledge to manipulate evidence. Da Costa went even further, embedding misleading clues in police reports through anonymous tips. At one point, he even infiltrated an online forum where amateur detectives speculated about his crimes. Under a false identity, he fed them fake theories, watched them chase ghosts while he planned his next kill. This eerie parallel to Dexter's interactions with law enforcement made him feel invincible. But, like Dexter, he underestimated human error. Yet the more he killed, the more attention he attracted. A trail of whispers, a pattern of disappearances, an inevitable mistake waiting to happen. And then it did. One night, while tracking his next target, Da Costa was spotted by a surveillance drone, a technology he had underestimated. The police, reviewing footage for an unrelated case, accidentally caught a glimpse of a man following a known criminal. He was seen but not identified, yet the walls were closing in. In Dexter, the protagonist's greatest fear was exposure, being seen for what he really was. Da Costa now faced the same nightmare. One mistake, one slip-up, and the entire illusion of his untouchability began to shatter. Chapter 4. The Fall of a Ghost. Da Costa's capture was not just an arrest, it was a spectacle. The media erupted with headlines. Real-life Dexter caught. Vigilante or villain? The world wanted answers. How had he evaded the law for so long? What drove him to kill? Was he truly a monster, or had he been a twisted form of justice? The court proceedings were intense. The prosecution labeled him a sadistic murderer who found pleasure in killing. The defense countered with a different narrative. He was a necessary evil, a dark answer to a broken justice system. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the benches, cameras flashed, and the audience hung on to every word. Testimonies were gripping. Survivors of his victim spoke of loss and horror, while others, those who had escaped justice themselves, expressed relief that the boogeyman had been removed from society. But then, former victims of crime who had been ignored by the justice system took the stand. Some said that Da Costa had done what the law had failed to do, offered them closure. One witness, the mother of a young girl whose attacker had been one of Da Costa's victims, stood before the court and said through tears, "The police let him walk free. I prayed for justice every night, and then one day he was gone. Tell me, who do I thank?" The courtroom was silent. The debate raged beyond the courtroom. Was Da Costa a modern-day avenger, a real-life Dexter who rid the world of those who had escaped true justice? Or was he simply another killer, no better than the criminals he hunted? Psychologists dissected his mind. Was he a psychopath who justified his bloodlust with a false sense of morality? Or was he a man pushed to the brink by a system that allowed evil to walk free? Dexter had Harry's code to keep his urges controlled, but Da Costa had no such moral anchor. Was his justice truly justice, or was it just an excuse to kill? Public opinion was divided. Some saw him as a monster, his methods no different from those of the very people he executed. Others saw him as a dark knight, a vigilante doing what the law failed to do. If the system worked, would he have ever needed to exist? Even within the police force, opinions clashed. Some officers admitted that Da Costa had eliminated dangerous criminals who had slipped through the cracks. Others saw him as the ultimate challenge, a murderer who had mocked the system for years and almost won. Social media exploded with hashtags like #RealDexter, #DarkJustice, and #FreeDaCosta. Online forums dissected his every move, some glorifying his meticulous planning, others condemning his brutality. His fan base grew. Some even claimed he was the true protagonist of the modern age, a necessary evil in a world where the law often failed. But at the heart of it all was one chilling question. What if he was right? What if the world really did need a Dexter? The trial reached its climax. The evidence was overwhelming. The jurors deliberated for hours, torn between moral outrage and a lingering sense of admiration. Was he the villain, or had society created him? And then came the verdict: guilty. The judge's gavel struck like a thunderclap. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, Da Costa turned to the cameras, a chilling smirk on his lips. No remorse, no regret, just a man who had played his game to the very end. And somewhere in the world, someone watching the news felt a twinge of understanding, perhaps even admiration, because deep down, they had always wondered, what if Dexter was real? Chapter 5. The Legacy of the Real-Life Dexter. And now, we come to the final, most chilling question. What happens when justice is no longer trusted? When people begin to believe that only blood can answer for blood? Public opinion on Da Costa remains deeply divided. Some view him as a necessary evil, a man who did what law enforcement couldn't. Others call him a dangerous sociopath who took the law into his own hands. Even today, forums discuss whether Da Costa was truly evil. But let me ask you, what do you think? If given the power, would you do what he did? Would you cross that line if you knew you could get away with it? Or would you step back, knowing that once that line is crossed, there's no turning back? Maybe, just maybe, that's the most terrifying question of all. Because in the end, Da Costa's real legacy isn't in the bodies he left behind. It's in the seed of doubt he planted in all of us. The whisper in the back of your mind when you watch the news, when you see a criminal walk free. What if someone took justice into their own hands? And if they did, would you stop them or would you cheer them on? Remember, justice is fragile. And once we decide that vigilante justice is acceptable, we open the door to chaos. The line between good and evil is thinner than we think. Perhaps the real horror is not Da Costa himself, but the possibility that someone like him could rise again,